What was life in Oakville? Life like in Oakville at the start of the war?
At the start of the war, well, there were town population was, I would think, somewhere around 25,000, 30,000, something like that. No, 2,500, 3,000. And I was related to about half them. I have a newspaper clipping from 1914 when my grandmother died, my great-grandmother died. And in that clipping from the local paper, it says the Lever family is the largest family connection in Oakville at that time. Pro-British, and possibly most of Ontario was at that time, when we didn't have quite as many immigrants as we do now. We were very pro-British to get in this and help them, as we felt that Britain was certainly threatened when Germany declared war. I was on the farm with my dad, and I had an exemption from call-up. And but you know, a young fellow in his 20, 21 gets a little itchy when there's some action somewhere, and he's kind of interested in getting into it. The idea that we got into it to liberate Europe or anything didn't really enter the minds of we young people, I don't think. This was a war and we better get in it. Now I joined the militia in 1940, the local B company, the Lord Scots, and did my weekly training, went to 2 weeks camp in Niagara Falls, Niagara Lake, on the lake, things like that. But then you start to look around, and all the young people were gone. All the young guys were gone. We felt we were going to be left out. And we were a group of sergeants, or not a group of sergeants, 3 of us in the Lord Scots in Oakville had become sergeants. And we told Jack Chambers was the major in charge of the B company at that time. And we told him in the summer of 1942, when the work was finished in the fall on the farm, we were going to go on active service. So he said, well, they're looking for officer candidates right now. Is it all right if I put your names in? So he did. And we went to Toronto to take exams and adaptability tests and so on. 2 of us passed. One lad didn't make it. But that's how we got into the war. During the First World War, the most expendable rank was lieutenant. And all of a sudden, after we got into this one, the powers that be decided, well, maybe that's going to happen this time, so we better have some reinforcement officers ready for when we get into actual battle. So that's why we were taken in, quite a large group. There were several hundred of us at that time that went to officers training. And when we got to England in '43, they really didn't know what to do with us. They had this, I would think there were 400 or 500 of us, reinforcement officers. They put us in reinforcement camps, and they really didn't know what to do with us. They had no units to send to them. Nobody needed reinforcements. The battle hadn't started. They gave us a list of 10 or a dozen courses to go on, and said, we want you gentlemen out of here on one of these courses. And so we were sent out on various courses. I did motorcycle courses three times because that was getting around the country. That was fun. Well, we were on a battle course in north of Worthing in a girls' school, a school they were using as barracks when D-Day went in. We got up one morning and the sky was just black with aircraft, just, we wondered, what's going on? They were down quite low. They weren't way up, they were down low. There were Mitchells and Marauders, bombers. And they were going over in flocks, and they were coming back up a little higher. And that was going on all day. And we were, what's going on? And it wasn't until evening that we found it was D-Day. So about a week later, they moved the whole camp of us up into the Midlands in Edwinstowe. The Duke of Portland's estate, I believe it was, we were on, and waiting to be sent out. Now we had some action. People were getting killed. We were sitting there waiting for somebody to get killed so we could take their place, which isn't a very good prospect, but except when you're young, you don't even think about that. You just want to get in there. However, that's when I got to France, we were in an orchard there for about a week or two. Then finally, the Falaise Gap thing was on just then. And the Algonquin regiment had lost almost half its strength fighting the Germans in the Falaise Gap. And that's where the major portion of the German tank troops were, and the Air Force almost obliterated them. But I joined, after that, I joined the Algonquin regiment at Abbeville. And it was the first time they had had a break in action, and the colonel had gathered all the officers in a building there where they were having a drink. First time they'd been able to do it in weeks. And I just nicely got a drink in my hand and was introduced to 2 or 3 of the fellows, and the colonel said, "Gentlemen, drink up, we're on the move within the hour." So we took off from there in trucks. We rode mostly in trucks with the tanks out ahead of us. When we got into, I'm not getting ahead of myself here for you, if we got into combat, if we got stopped, and the Germans at that point were retreating, we've had to go fairly quickly to try to catch up to them. They stopped at every water barrier and put up a fight, because that meant we had to stop, deploy the whole division, and make a battle plan and go in. It gave them time to get more people back. But the first day I was with the Algonquins, we covered about 35 miles in one day trying to catch them. While we lived out in the open, sometimes we were able to get into some homes at night, or into barns or something like that. But quite often we just dug slit trenches, and we slept in the slit trenches. And the Germans almost gave up on Belgium. We didn't have too much resistance in Belgium, except the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division, which were pure infantry divisions, were given the job of clearing the Channel ports, and that's where the fighting was intense in northern France and Belgium. So we were down below that with the tanks, and we got through to Bruges, a beautiful cathedral city. We got there one afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, down a great broad highway with trees each side, a very pretty situation. And our advanced scouts got into the outskirts of Bruges, and the Germans met them with a white flag. And they came out with a delegation of about 10 or 15 German officers. The first time I'd seen German officers, they never allowed their officers to get caught. They always pulled back, and we never, unless we really took them by surprise. You didn't get any officers. And they didn't want us to attack Bruges because it's a beautiful old cathedral city, and they didn't want it destroyed. They said if we would stop there for the night, next morning they would give up. Of course, next morning our scouts went in and they were gone and pulled right back into the Scheldt estuary. They pulled everything back from France, Belgium, into the Scheldt estuary. The thinking here of the Germans is that we could not attack Germany itself without taking a major port to supply us. By the time we got to Holland, we were being supplied from Cherbourg 500 or 600 miles back, and that's a long supply line. So, and the ports that were available was Antwerp, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam. The only three ports that would support such a battle. So they fought desperately to hold Holland and keep us away from those ports. They gave up the city of Antwerp. It's about 20-25 miles down the Scheldt River from the North Sea. They gave up the city, but they held the estuary. And after Bruges, about 2 days later, we hit a double canal, the Leopold Canal and the Derivation Canal. And we put in an attack there one night just at dusk. The Germans had destroyed the bridges, blown the bridges up. So the plan was the Algonquins would go in at dusk in rubber boats, and we crossed the two canals and got on the other side. And a German ploy is usually to let you in, then they cut you off. And that's what they did, what they tried to do. But we were assured the tanks would, the engineers would have bridges in overnight and the tanks would be there at first light. Well, the resistance was far too great. The engineers were just shelled by their artillery that they couldn't put bridges in. Finally, it was decided that the regiment would pull out. And my platoon was off at one side of the action, almost next to the canal, and the colonel couldn't get information to me. I didn't know they were pulling out. And about 11 o'clock in the morning, our artillery started firing out, maybe 200 yards out ahead of our position on the German area. And it stopped and started up again, and it was only about 100 yards out. They fired for quite a 15-20 minutes, then they stopped again, pulled back, and it was only 50 yards out, and the odd stray one was landing on our position. So I was in a trench with my sergeant, and I said, "Sergeant, I think we better get out of here. I don't want to be killed by our own artillery." When we first heard it, we thought they were shelling or going to be reinforcements into us, but that wasn't what they were doing. They were trying to get us to pull back. And so I told him we had my men in a U shape, and I said, "You get the guys on the right, and I'll get the guys on the left, and let's get out of here." So we got back. And the first man that met me on the other side, here's me, a 22-year-old lieutenant, thinking, I'm going to get hell for doing this. And the first person I met was the colonel with his hand out. He says, "Thank God you got back. I couldn't get information to you. We were pulling out." The history books say we lost 143 men that night. And that, after that, we pulled on around to, I'm getting to your question. we pulled back to around Antwerp. And at that time, by then the Arnhem parachute drop had gone in and it was in difficulty, and they had a salient trying to get up to them, and they moved us up to guard one of the sides of this salient in case the Germans tried to cut them off. And we spent about 2 weeks at Turnout, a town up along the salient that they're in. We had a few skirmishes there. I didn't lose any men. I lost 2 men back at the double canals. I lost 2 men out of my platoon. they brought us back after the Arnhem thing fiasco was obviously we weren't going to get to them. They pulled us back to Antwerp and we headed up towards Bergen op Zoom. And that's, there was quite heavy. We were in a Belgian military camp, Camp de Brischke, some such name. And the Germans had been using it too, and they had it fortified, and they gave us a little trouble. And we were trying to, the main body of the Algonquin was trying to go up through it. It's a wooded area, and they had it booby trapped some fierce. It was just hard to move in there because you set off a booby trap. I happened to be the reserve platoon during this, and they got held up in these woods. And I was told to make a left flanking around the woods and take it. There were some farm buildings around the other side of it, which we did, and we took about 20 German prisoners. We sat with the prisoners there in a building in a farmhouse one night. I had quite a chat with one of the German prisoners who spoke excellent English. He'd been to Canada, and he wanted to know what are you doing, and he's doing over. There's none of your business. You shouldn't be over here fighting us. I had quite an argument with him during the night. Next morning, a rather interesting story. Being the Algonquins and more or less an Indian name, and although we had Indians, but not many in our unit, they decided the town of Eschen was about a mile and a half up a road. The rest was farmland up there. They decided the Algonquin regiment in single file that night would move up one field beyond the road. In single file we'd move up and be in position to take Eschen first thing in the morning. And we did that, and it was quite amusing. We went up to, and at one point, the Germans we could hear them talking in the farmhouse. They were laughing and talking, having a great time. And couple of them come out to relieve themselves, and they didn't know we were in the bushes right there beside them. We took the town of Eschen that morning, and the Germans had a lot of 88 guns sighted around the town to stop our armor from going up. And they were finally, our armor, we took the town, then our armor, the plan was they would beetle up this road, not worry about whether there were mines or anything. They were going to take a chance and join us, which they did. And the road wasn't mined. And they were loggered down behind buildings along walls and so on, and after we took the town, and the Germans were pounding them with 88s, and the British were coming up through the fields on our right, and the colonel asked me to go up. He said, there's a tank up by the building up there. Go up there and make sure he knows those are British troops, not German. So I went up, and the tank commander was out of the tank, and we had a chat there, and I said, we were watching the British coming up. I said, don't fire on those. All of a sudden, an 88 put a round right through the middle of his tank. So I started back down to our headquarters down the road, and there were 3 or 4 tanks along a wall there, and Germans were firing at them. And a piece of shrapnel flew off it and went through my arm, and that's where I got hit. Unfortunately, I thought I'd lost my arm, and I was looking around, and there's a Red Cross Jeep just coming out of the middle of the village. and I was beetling down the road, and I held up my hand, and they saw I'd been hit. So they got me on the Jeep, and I going past their headquarters, I waved at the colonel. They took me to Antwerp. I was in hospital in Antwerp for a week, on the 3rd floor of a hospital right in the middle of the city. And it was a British hospital, manned by British nurses. Really very nice girls. But the Germans at that point had switched their V-2 rockets from London to Antwerp, the port area. And they were pounding every night. I would say at least once or twice an hour, one of these V-2s would come in. And the blackouts would fall off, and the nurses would rush in and put them all back up again. And but and one morning I'd been there a week, and one of the nurses came in, and she was fiddling with the things out of my pockets on the table beside me, and I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Oh, we're flying you back to England this morning." I said, "That's the best news I ever heard." So I wound up back in a Canadian hospital in England. How did I make my way?
Yeah.
I was at 3rd Div headquarters on Increment. 3rd Div headquarters was in the Bomberlawn Hotel at Brockenhurst, down in the New Forest, north of Southampton, north and west of Southampton. And I was at headquarters there, and in every German town every English town of any size, there was a dance on Saturday night. There was always a dance on Saturday night, and we troops had a great time going to these dances. That's where the girls were. And I met my wife at a Christmas Eve dance there. And I was invited home for Christmas lunch or dinner, and we had a New Year's party at 3rd Div headquarters. So I invited Eileen and her sister Mary to come up to that, and well, it went on from there.
What was it like to come home to Oakville, and what was your reception when you got back?
There wasn't. We came up from Halifax on a train, and my parents met me, and I was married on the 2nd of January. I was told when I was in hospital that I would be on the next draft coming home on a hospital ship. Of course, we didn't know whether they couldn't tell me whether that's next week, 3 weeks, 3 months, it would be the next draft. So I have been going with Eileen for about a year then, so I thought, well, I asked her, well, would you like to come home with me? And she says, yes, she would. So, I said, well, we're going to have to do something fairly quick because I could be on a draft any time. So on the 2nd, that's why we were married on the 2nd of January. And we spent our honeymoon in the Strand Palace in London. And I find it interesting, particularly in the context of the way people seem to see these things today. People are very nervous today that, oh, don't do this, don't do that, it could hurt you or something. We went to London, the Germans were sending their V-2s over constantly. Nobody ever suggested you shouldn't go to London for your honeymoon, it's dangerous. We went honeymoon, my parents, her parents, or anybody didn't suggest we shouldn't go. And I had a cousin with the Air Force in London, and he had made arrangements for the hotel for us. That's how we got to the Strand Palace. And then coming back, I came back in February. I was put on a ship in February and came back home, and Eileen didn't come over till June. But getting back to your original question, when we arrived in Toronto, of course my parents got it, and of course we lived out in the country, and there wasn't anything particular. My family was there, all of my brothers and sister. My brother he fought in Italy. He was still in Italy. He didn't get back until, the end of 45, early 46, I think it was, when Ross got back. He fought with the 48th Highlanders in Italy. But as far as the town, some of the neighbors that were my friends had me for dinner, and the town eventually, and I can't remember, it was after everything, and most of the boys were back, that the town had a banquet for us and gave us a memento for the occasion. But other than that, we come back and you try to fit in to find your place after having been away for so long, scarred by the war. And I am concerned when people are criticizing our guys who are in Afghanistan at the moment. They seem to fail to realize these guys were the way we were when war started. This is something I'd like to get into. Our people there are volunteers. The Lawrence Scott's Regiment has sent over 150 guys on peace missions around the world. And these are guys who volunteered. The people I feel sorry for are the Americans who joined the army to get a free education, and all of a sudden they're over in Iraq being killed. They weren't volunteers, although I'm sure there's a lot of them that are quite willing to be there, but a lot of them that were caught up in this thing.
When you had a command in Europe during the campaign, did you have any soldiers from Oakville in your command?
No, nobody. The guys in the Algonquin Regiment were from Northern Ontario, most of them. Now we got reinforcements, but the very, very few. The reinforcement situation was just disastrous. I had a platoon should be 36 men, and a sergeant and a lieutenant. I was down to 12 men at times. When you'd lose men, I never had more than 18 or 20 in my platoon. The Algonquins, as I said before, during after coming in, they came in several weeks after D-Day. The armor came in a week or two, I think it was. But they fought around the Valley Gap and they lost half their strength, and that was never replaced. The government never had enough replacements to build us up the way we should be, which cost lives. I was saying we covered 35 miles the first day I joined the Algonquins. This was me sitting in the front of a 60 hundredweight truck and my guys in the back. And here's a young, inexperienced lieutenant riding in front of these guys that have been through battle for several weeks and pretty desperate situations. And I heard a lot of very snide remarks about somebody coming up and I didn't know one thing from another without using a nasty word. But I didn't pay any attention to them. I didn't let them get to me. I knew my situation. I knew that I was the new guy on the block, and I was going to have to take a little roughing up a bit to see what I was like. But after I got them back from across the canal, I was one of them. They were just great. I got a letter when I came home after I came home from one of them saying that he had been under several officers. He says, I never was under one who looked after his men as well as you did. So I was somewhat proud of that. But, and after this debacle at the canals, we were given a 12-hour pass to Ghent, and the regiment took platoons. One day, one platoon could go to Ghent. They put us on trucks and we took us there. And during battle, because officers are prime target for German snipers and so on, you take all your insignia down and you carry a rifle, so you just look like everybody else. And I had done that, and I was getting on the truck to go to Ghent, and the colonel's watching. He said, Lever, get your rank mounted before you get there. I said, yes, sir, I have it here. I had needle and thread. I was trying to sew my pips on my shoulder. And we got going nicely, and the guys were having a bit of fun. They were having a bit of fun. We were going on a holiday. And finally, one of them said, he says, sir, what are you going to do in Ghent all by yourself? I said, I have no idea. He said, well, take those damn things down and come with us. Said, that's what I did. I took the one off I had on and I put them in my pocket. And we went to a few pubs and a few drinks. And the English had a song during the war. Oh, what a wonderful war. Now, you have to understand English humor to understand what they meant. And I'm afraid I have to say I had a wonderful war. I was fortunate to be an officer right from the start, and no responsibilities for some time until I got to France and joined the Algonquin Regiment. I had responsibilities at 3rd Div headquarters, but that wasn't in action. But we had a wonderful time in England. As I said, there were dances every Saturday night. We were invited to people's homes. We were invited out for dinner. We wandered around the country just enjoying ourselves. As an officer, I didn't need a pass. So an interesting story, maybe, when I was down just before D-Day at this battle course north of Worthing. That's not too far from Eileen's place. We weren't married then. And one weekend we were told we were confined to barracks, Saturday and Sunday. Confined to barracks. So there was a chap from town here, I can't remember his name. Anyway, there was a chap from town here, another officer with me, on this course. And I said, I want to go across to Boulder Lane to see Flemington, to see my girlfriend. Well, he said, I got friends in Lyndhurst, and that's just north of it. And he said, I'd like to go there too. I said, let's go. So we walked out of camp, and we were going to take the train. And we looked on the railway station, and it was covered with MPs. They had red bands on there. So we thought, well, I can't go that way. So we went out to the bus station. Wasn't anyone there. So we got on the bus. We took the bus across to Southampton. And then we thought, well, it's faster by rail. So we went looked at the railway station again, and it was, again, nothing but MPs. So we got it back on the bus, and we went across to Lyndhurst, and he dropped off, and I went down to my girlfriend's house. And we were sitting there on Sunday evening, June the 5th, having dinner. And my in-laws' house is, there's a hedge, not that far, maybe 40 feet out from the roadway, and Boulder Lane is just a narrow country road. We were having dinner there, and I looked out, and it was chock-a-block with military trucks loaded with troops. And I said, oh, gee, I gotta get home. The road's full of troops. However, by the time we finished dinner, they'd gone. They were absolutely gone. We didn't turn to laughter. D-Day went in. That had been, they were going that night, but it was postponed. Eisenhower postponed it because of the weather. Then they went in on the Monday. So we got back to camp and nobody knew we were gone. Or if they did, they didn't say anything.